In today's video, let's learn about Sanford Meisner, his technique, and the Neighborhood Playhouse. Hello, theater kids, and welcome back to this series for Theater 5363 Acting Theory in America. My name is Heather, and this week we're going to be talking about another one of the great giants in acting theory, and that is Sanford Meisner. We'll also be talking about his contributions to the Neighborhood Playhouse. But before we get started, let's get our source on. Once again, all of our readings are going to be coming from Method Acting Reconsidered, which is a series of essays compiled by David Krasner. We'll be taking a look at a couple of different selections from that book. If you are interested in checking it out for yourself, I'll have a link down in the description if you would like to find a copy of the book. But for now, if you're ready, curtain up and let's get started. Now, Brant Pope begins by explaining that only Sanford Meisner himself can really teach the Meisner method. Anything else that calls itself Meisner is an extension of what Meisner himself taught. So Meisner, just like all the other teachers that we've talked about in this class, had a core principle. Now, for Strasberg, it was feel. For Adler, it was imagine. And for Meisner, it was do. His emphasis on doing, the action of acting, leads to an expression of an emotion. So an actor's attention should be on what is being done to them. So this marks a pretty big shift in what we've been talking about over the course of this class on being conscious of the self and instead being conscious of others. So the Meisner method really relies on actors being able to play off of each other. Now, much like Adler, Meisner taught that acting means that you have to behave truthfully in an imaginary situation. However, he stresses that you need to place primary importance on what the other person in the scene is doing and their behavior. So the goal is to focus on an interaction that allows the audience, not the other characters, to assign meaning and emotions. So the actor needs to access his feelings by activating emotions in other characters on stage. Meisner begins with what is called playing the problem. This means that the approach deals with the actor asking himself, what problem does the other character have that I need to resolve? So the idea is to find a way to make the scene about the other person on stage. And if they're doing the same for you, then you have just created a strong ensemble. The essay uses examples from the play Death of a Salesman featuring Happy and Biff. It does a really good job at breaking down the mindset and working through the method. So definitely take a look at how it breaks it down in that chapter because I found it really useful. Now, the overall effect is going to create a result of seeing acting as doing something to others rather than just emoting to the other people on stage. And next, Meisner teaches the redefinition of conflict and character. This rejects the idea that an actor needs to portray a personality trait or a character type because this places too much emphasis on the self, which again, he's trying to avoid. The job of the actor is to show point of view, so your self-concept and your worldview of the characters, and behave consistently within that point of view. This is used to clarify relationships with the other characters and reveal your mindset, so you're letting the audience make a judgment about the character. So Meisner addresses conflict between characters on stage on playing the objectives, not the conflict. Conflict, according to Meisner, comes as a result of two characters that are trying to change each other. So the actor has to concentrate on what can I do to make this other character change. Therefore, conflict has to be a result of positive energy going back and forth between characters. Now, for me, this is not an easy concept because it's a complete mindset from just natural instincts as an actor and through what most acting teachers will teach you. The idea of using positive energy, and in particular, that's kind of hard for me to wrap my brain around. That's something that's going to come with a lot of training and practice, especially if you're in an emotionally charged scene and you're so used to playing the emotion instead of concentrating on what am I trying to change in the other character. I was really surprised at how different Meisner's approach was from the other teachers that we've talked about in this class. It's really hard to see how this branched off of Stanislavski, just like everybody else did, until you really think about how Stanislavski revised his method in the later years of his life, where he changed from an inside-out approach to an outside-in approach, and that follows a little more closely to what Meisner was doing. I think that if you work on this enough, if you really want to knuckle down and really study Meisner, you can create actors that are really in touch with Stanislavski's idea of communion in order to create an ensemble experience. CC Courtney starts out by explaining that although Meisner was affiliated with Neighborhood Playhouse for over 50 years, it's not his creation, which surprised me. I always thought of them as one of the same, and I always figured he was one of the founders. However, Neighborhood Playhouse actually started in 1915 as a non-Broadway theater, and it housed non-realistic and experimental plays. It ceased production in the 1920s and renamed as the Neighborhood Playhouse School of Theater, which went on eventually to produce some very famous graduates, Tony Randall, Christopher Lloyd, Mary Steenburgen, Sidney Pollack, Jeff Goldblum, and that's just to name a very few. Meisner actually joined Neighborhood Playhouse in 1935, and this is where he developed the Meisner technique. But he didn't abandon non-realistic theater. In fact, in the second year of study with Meisner, students used non-realistic plays for study in final productions with the aim of being believable in unbelievable circumstances. At the Neighborhood Playhouse, the main Meisner exercise taught is the repetition exercise. You'll use that 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for the first few months of study. In this exercise, two actors face each other and they comment on what they observed. And they repeat what the other just said in their exact words, and they respond truthfully, reading each other's behavior. So this is meant to relieve the pressure of trying to think of what you're supposed to say, and it allows you to focus on your partner, not yourself. Now, eventually, Meisner added emotion to the exercise with the stipulation that the emotion can be from any source, a memory, a picture, a piece of music, but prepare the emotion through your imagination. Now, I observed that this is like the halfway point in between Strasberg and Adler in their methods. Meisner admitted there's power in emotional memory, like Strasberg, but the imagination is going to be more dependable, just like Adler. If you use the same emotional triggers for multiple performances, they're going to start losing their effectiveness. So if you fill that in with imagination, that's the surest way to keep your performance fresh. At the end of the first year of study, Meisner works with relationships between characters. If it's not clear and written in the text, then the actor has to use his imagination to fill in the gaps. And again, this is very much like what Adler taught. First year students also have daily training in speech and singing classes. Singing classes include relaxation, preparation, voice production, and the interpretation of songs. Now, this made me really happy to hear about because I'm constantly telling musical theater students that the lyrics are just as important as the emotion of the song, because the words of the song were written that way for a reason. There are specific words that were chosen for that reason, and so you need to give them just as much meaning as the emotion of the song. The lyrics sometimes get overlooked in the attempt to focus on vocal quality. The first years are also instructed in ballet and modern dance, and it's not just to make them better dancers, because let's face it, some people were not born to dance, but it does teach you to move with strength and flexibility in your own body. Now, at the end of the first year, students demonstrate their skills for the second years and the staff to determine who's going to be admitted to the second year of the program. Second year at Neighborhood Playhouse is by invitation only, and it has to be by a unanimous vote by the staff. That feels to me like an unachievable goal, but this is why it's an elite program. This allows a high percentage of Neighborhood Playhouse graduates to go on to have a successful career. So that's why it's so hard to get into. Now, the second year focuses more on character work, including impediments and dialects, which that's one of my favorite things to play around with is dialects. Scripts that they use become more complex. They deal with broader emotional issues. Students are also instructed in script analysis with a focus on Shakespeare and the classics. They also add jazz to the dance schedule, as well as the Alexander technique. This is one that I hadn't heard this phrase before, so I had to look it up, but it's a method of movement education that improves your posture, coordination, and balance. And they also learn fencing. Outside of acting, you are taught theater history, which introduces the students to various types of acting styles over the ages. And again, Meisner used repetition technique with second years. Whenever an actor would struggle with a difficulty in character work or scene analysis, Meisner returns them to the repetition in order to ground them and move them on to that next level. Now, even after Meisner retired, Neighborhood Playhouse kept his techniques and added classes on acting for the camera. Neighborhood Playhouse also offers 3 new sessions. There's the Professional Actor Training Summer Workshop, which is 6 weeks full-time, 90 hours of acting, 45 hours of voice, and 45 hours of jazz. There's the Teacher Training Summer Workshop, which allows teachers to observe summer sessions and practice teach their advanced students. And there's the British Classical Theatre Workshop, which is 2 weeks, 70 hours of work on acting and Shakespeare and other playwrights that are considered classics. Now, although the way that we consume media has changed, the Neighborhood Playhouse has remained faithful to the Meisner technique. And I believe that what they do at the Playhouse is an integral part in training the next generation of well-rounded actors, because they don't stray from the basics of Meisner and those he was inspired by. Now, learning about Meisner was really interesting to me just because Meisner was someone that I had heard a ton about. I've always heard a lot about the Meisner technique, but didn't really know a lot of the ins and outs of it. It's not something that we talked a lot about in undergrad, so I was kind of interested to learn how it worked. And I found the repetition technique to be really interesting, that there's always that one exercise that you can come back to, and it's like as long as you can do that, then you're able to build on it. And how it saves you the pressure of trying to think of, I don't know what to say. If you're not good at improv, this is definitely one that you can use. And I feel that with its focus on imagination and on working with others, this would be a good technique for using with a lot of beginner actors, especially ones that have trouble thinking of what to say, or maybe are not comfortable working with a partner yet. This forces you to actually work with a partner and to not worry about what to say, to just observe and to use your imagination, because again, a lot of your younger and more beginning actors are going to be a little bit more imaginative than your older actors. You don't really get to flex that imagination muscle as often as you do when you are younger. So I do feel like that's something that is really useful. Now, as far as trying to reimagine conflict as trying to change the other person rather as emote, this is one that may be a little bit harder to teach and may need a little more practice. So that is one that you may or may not want to use with younger actors, just depending on the situation, on the show, on the scene that they are working on the character. And again, just kind of like all of these techniques that we have talked about over the course of this series, there are different bits and pieces that you can use depending on what's comfortable for you, or what is right for the show, or what is right for the character. So if the conflict version of Meisner does not work for you, then you may want to jump back into Strasberg. If you're not happy tapping into those emotions, then maybe you want to use an Adler method in order to use that. So I like that you can mix and match these different types of theories in order to work for you or what's right for that character. So I find that fascinating. I find the work that Neighborhood Playhouse does very interesting, a very, very elite community to get to be in, even more so than, say, Actors Studio, I believe, having to have a unanimous vote in order to get into the second year of study. But they do produce a lot of really great actors. So there is something to be said for the elitism of that particular program. But just the fact that they also offer the 3 other programs that are not part of the regular School of Study, I do find that interesting as well. So that's something that I would like to do some more looking into and some more research on. So overall, would I use the Meisner method? Absolutely. This is something that I think that, as I said, would work with some of your beginning students, just depending on where they are on their journey. Is it something that I personally would use? It's something that I would definitely like to look into, especially as far as wrapping my head around how to use Meisner method for an emotional conflict scene. So that's definitely something that I want to try out in the future. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on Meisner. I hope you found this useful and informative. Why don't you let me know about it down in the comments below? Make sure that you stay around for the rest of this series, where we're going to be talking some more about the great acting teachers and theater history. But for now, we will say goodbye and scene.